Good morning, or depending on when you watch this video, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. And if you know, you know. It's the Truman Show. So the next lady, woman in our perusing of the Bible regarding the effect of women in the Bible, we end up with Sarah. Now, I wanted to do a short on this one because, I'm trying to keep them short, but unfortunately, there's too much to unpack with Sarah because Sarah is a both a victim, okay, of the patriarchy, and she's also a perpetrator of of sin against another human being. Okay, so let me. It looks a little crooked. Let's see. Is that better? No. Oh, sorry, guys. Should have done this before. Okay, so our tale starts on Genesis 12 when Abraham is called by God. Um, he takes his people out of the land of, I think he's in Ur, and he goes to Canaan. And so there's a great famine in the land. And so he goes to Egypt. Now, the land of Canaan was very dependent on the rain and all that, so it hadn't rained. And in Egypt, you have one thing that makes agriculture flourish, which is the River Nile. Every year, depending on the rainfall, the River Nile floods, right, and floods the banks, and so it becomes it was very fertile soil. Okay, I learned that in school back in Mexico. I don't think people cover this sort of thing anymore. Anyways, so here's the first time. Here's the time with Abraham fails to protect the bride. Okay, they go into the land of Canaan. They're going to Egypt, and Sarah, it's a beautiful woman, and so he tells her, "Tell them to that you're my sister, not my wife, so that all things would go well with me." And sure enough, when they see her, they take her, and she and she becomes, I guess, Pharaoh's wife in a way. So this is one of those passages that Christians love to try to explain away to give Abraham the benefit of the doubt. All right. Now, here's a couple ways to look at this one. Okay. Now, these are different times that we're in right now. Okay. Now, if Sarah is the sister, right? She's also a virgin, right? So there's a certain value to her beauty and virginity, and so they would keep in, and him as a brother was able to negotiate for her, her diary and things like that, which is what happens. He gives her to Pharaoh, and then they get possessions and things like that, but at the price of his wife, right? Now, a couple things to look at it this way. If they had told her, if they had said that she was his wife, Abraham's wife, that it is very likely that Abraham would have been killed, and the status of Sarah, instead of becoming part of a harem, would have been something else. Okay, because she is no longer a virgin, so she's no longer desirable as part of Pharaoh's harem, wives, concubines, sort of thing. Okay, so now the problem starts with in chapter 12, where God calls for Abraham and he offers his protection. Yahweh promises to protect Abraham. Now, he left his home and went to the land of Canaan, and then on Yahweh's. Then he went to Egypt and protect. So the protection of Yahweh was there for him to have. So he should have trusted that. There's no doubt about it. Now, was Sarah sexually assaulted while she was in the hands of the Pharaoh? Well, maybe. And see, none of these things are straight black and white as you would think. Because if you remember the story of Esther, okay, she was beautiful. It's another Sarai, very beautiful girl, and she went into who was that? Like the king at the time. And what did they do? It took a full year of cleaning and oils and all this other stuff before she even saw the king. So it's very likely that Sarah wasn't touched as he was in there, right? As she was brought into the Pharaoh's household. We don't know. We are not told. But God had given Abraham the knowledge of God's protection, and Abraham either protected his bride or didn't protect his bride. So it is for you to decide as you read through the book and you understand and you get a little bit of background on it. This is not, none of the stories in the Bible really are 100% black and white in a way. I mean, yes, there's the wickedness when wickedness is wickedness, but some of the stories with the patriarchs are not black and white. Okay, the patriarchs tend to be good sometimes, terrible human beings sometimes. So what happens? God defends the bride. Okay, he comes down and brings out a famine and pestilence on Egypt, and the Pharaoh figures out who it is, so he sends Abraham away with his wife and a bunch of money. Well, cattle and gold and all this other stuff. So they leave the land, right? Okay, again the patriarchy for forgetting to protect the bride and all of that. And I mean, I guess Sarah could have said no, but I think that there's more to it than we know. And one of the ways that you can figure out, this is where knowing history, knowing the background of the times would give you more insight. But there's two things: either he was truly taking care of Sarah by protecting her in the best way he knew how, and lying about her status as his wife and that as his wife, and telling people that she was his sister, or he was being a coward. It's for you to decide. Your eyes, when you read, will tell you what you're going to see. Okay, and then so they leave, and again, and God promises two things to Abraham. He promises land, and he promises an heir, okay, a child of his own. And he tells them more than once that this is going to happen, that you're going to have a child. And in a almost retelling of the fall of humanity, almost a retelling of Adam and Eve, you have the woman Sarah taking something that doesn't really belong to her, Hagar, the Egyptian slave, and offers her to her husband, who takes her. Okay, forbidden fruit, the woman trying to take on something that she didn't want to wait for, and the man not standing up for the things that God already said that he was going to do, because he told him it'll be from your womb, it will be from your loins, this new child that you're going to have. Again, uh was Sarah mistaken? Yes, she was offering up something that wasn't hers. Hagar, like every other human being in the world, belongs to God. And she took that slave and gave it to her husband, your apple or fruit, forbidden fruit. And Abraham should have said no. Should have said no. Should have said, I know that Yahweh who protects us will give us a child from you and me. And we don't have to, it's taking something that God already said you will have and getting ahead of yourself. Okay. Trying to somehow subvert God's authority, saying, no, I'm going to do it on my own time and my own way and whatever. Okay. So again, and what happens every single time we try to take on what God has for us ahead of us. Okay, now think about it. I don't know how old Hagar was, but Hagar was a young woman, right? Abraham was 86 years old. 86 years old. It was a terrible thing both Sarah and Abraham did, both of them. So the other thing that you need to take away from this is God works with us where we are to help us move along the path until we can become more sanctified in his presence. Okay. All right. So what happens? And here's another. And this I'm gonna break into two, and we're gonna end in the next thing that happens here, and is Hagar becomes pregnant. Okay. And guess what happens with Sarah? Sarah doesn't like it. She gets mad at her husband, who should have said no. She's mad at herself probably because now you know at the age of 86, Abraham is capable of having children. So the problem was always Sarah. Okay, her womb was closed. So of course, Hagar is a little sassy because she's like, yeah, see, it was you that was broken, not him. All right. So the phrase is Hagar looked on to her Sarah with contempt. You can look at it in many ways you want. You can meditate on that and see what that would mean on a in a world where Hagar really didn't have so much any power, right? So Sarah is angry and she yells at Abraham, I gave her to you and you took her, and now look at her. She looks at me with contempt. And again, Abraham, instead of standing up for the woman that's carrying his child and saying to his wife, well, we'll just have to make the best of our decisions. What did Adam did in the garden? He threw his wife under the bus and God under the bus. And what does Abraham does? He throws Hagar under the bus and he says to Sarah, this is your slave. Do whatever you want with her. So Sarah treats her badly, and then Hagar runs away. She runs away from her and all, and into the wilderness. And here's the first time that we see in the Bible when someone gives a name for God. Okay, Hagar is in the wilderness, and she is, running away from Sarah, and Yahweh, the messenger of Yahweh, finds her and says, Hagar, what are you doing here? And she says, my master is treating me badly, so I'm running away. And he tells her, you're pregnant. Okay, go back and submit to your master, to Sarah, and you will have a child, and from them will come great nations, and makes her all those promises. So she goes back, and the place that where she sees the messenger of God, he calls it the place where God sees. Oh no, she says, you're a God that sees. uh so just think about the significance of that. Now watch the one, this from later on in your book of Exodus and the Levitical laws and the Deuteronomy. God, Abraham left, essentially made Hagar a widow and her son an orphan. Okay. He denied his responsibility as a father to the child that Hagar was carrying, and his responsibility after taking on a second woman, a second wife. Okay. Whose wife does a woman like that become, and whose child does a child like that become? God's child. God's god's they fall directly on the protection of Yahweh. Okay. And there will be consequences both for Sarah and for Abraham. There will be consequences for this decision, because when Hagar was being mistreated and she ran away, there was real danger of death. Anyways, that's it for today. We'll see the second part and the rest of the story on another video. But we, as Christians and evangelicals and all the stuff, they see Abraham as a great man, and he was. He had faith in God, and his faith was flawed, and it could have been better, but he was human just like the rest of us, and therefore he is a lot of shades of this and that. All right. And lest you thought that I was dragging on men all the time, let me tell you, Sarah was no peachy king either. She was not the greatest lady right there. Okay. She was obedient to her husband, but she offered up something that didn't belong to her really. Now, okay, so Hagar was a servant, but every single human being in this world belongs to God and God only. We're not property of anybody. All right. And let me tell you, there's this whole thing about how women become the property of men when they get married and stuff like that. And ultimately, the final answer on that would be that we all belong to God, both men and women. All right. So come back. We'll revisit, and you'll see how this particular sin and the next one doesn't go unpunished. All right. God bless. See you later. Bye.